think I just hit $1 million. And I was like, yes. Really excited.
Wow.
But that felt a little surreal. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had a goal of 600. You're only 8 months into that first year and you already hit 1 million. So you're probably going to double that goal, what you originally had. This is my friend, Christina Booker. Christina is the owner and CEO and founder of
Booker Transport Solutions.
There you go. Well, listen, thank you so much for being here. We were talking, catching up a little bit before we went live here. Before we kind of peel the onion back and start diving into, kind of the nitty gritty of the business, could you tell me, I mean, I know you had some experience in brokerage and logistics and transportation before you started your business. What was the primary reason why you decided to start Booker Transport Solutions?
In my career, I got to a point where I was looking for that next step. I felt as if I hit a ceiling at my W-2 that I was at. I've been in all the roles from entry-level freight broker with no business to business development, back to freight broker. I did some training for a while. So it just felt like, well, I was looking for that next step. And I essentially had two routes. I can become a freight agent, or I can start my own brokerage, or I can go and do the W-2 thing at another brokerage, right? So what made sense the most for me, and this is, I feel like, is an individual choice, right, in your freight brokerage career, was to start my own MC. It was very scary, but that's the route that I took. And here I am a year later. And it's a little surreal that I'm here and I'm alive and kicking and doing real well. It's been quite the journey.
Yeah. So when did your MC officially go live? Do you have a date or a month on that?
Yeah, so my MC officially went live in October of
Okay.
2023. I
2023.
was not operational until April. I didn't announce that I started my company until April.
April of 2024?
April of 2024.
Wow. So it hasn't even been a year
Uh,
since you were operational.
yeah, since I was operational, it has not even been a year.
Wow. Okay. So in 8 months of being operational, share with everybody kind of what you did in revenue and maybe a little bit about maybe the profit margins. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I hit my first million. I have been looking at that number. That was my goal. Well, my goal was like 600,000. I remember I wrote it down specifically in my journal, and when I wrote it down, I said to myself, I just don't know how I'm going to be able to hit this. There's so many things, so many obstacles that were jumping at me when I started my MC.
Right.
But I wrote that down. And on the 18th of this month, in the morning, like 6 o'clock in the morning, I got my last load and I was like, I think that's it. So I jumped in there and I was like, I think I just hit $1 million. And I was like, yes. Really excited. But that felt a little surreal. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had a goal of 600. You're only 8 months into that first year and you already hit 1 million. So you're probably going to double that goal, what you originally had.
I like to look at every day, every week, every month as kind of a fresh slate, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, I did that, but I don't by any means say to myself, like, just because I did that this year, right? What's to say if I don't keep working hard and I don't keep grinding, I don't keep hustling, I'm going to hit that again next year, right? There's so many different circumstances when it comes to the freight world. I mean, one of the things that pushed me to that million was a project that kind of came out of nowhere. And that project was one of those things where I was freaking out because I was like, am I going to be able to do this? And I think something in my head said, this is what you wanted. This is what you've been asking for, right? This is your moment to shine. If you can't make this work, you're not going to be able to do this. So I said, okay, one way or another, I'm going to do it. And it came as a surprise, but I made it work. And after that project, it went smoothly. I secured that shipper, I secured that customer, and they've slowed down, so it's one of those things that's just constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly.
The key there is this, is what you said, the past doesn't always equal the future, but the fact is now in business and in life, you're kind of like a rubber band, right? And when that rubber band is stretched, it never goes back to the exact same shape, even though it looks like it does. You've stretched yourself and you've already overcome some of those initial hurdles of startup and paying carriers and kind of moving the loads and having the confidence and all the things that go along with that. So, I mean, I have no doubts. I know you're being conservative, but let's talk a little bit about your profit margins? I mean, I don't need to know necessarily your profit bottom line or anything, but we know that most brokers are somewhere typically in the 10 to 20% range. I mean, are you doing a more full truckload? Are you doing more LTL? Are you doing partials? I mean, and then talk to us a little bit about your margin.
Yeah, I think that I come from a background where I'm consistently used to 15, 20% profit margins.
Yep.
That was what I aimed for. I was happy with that, right? Coming into this, I knew I would have to start out lower. So I think I started out at like 8%, moved that up to 10% slowly, with some trust with a couple of my customers. And I think I ended at like 12%.
So blended, you were kind of in that 10 to 12% range.
Right.
Perfect. All right, great. Well, that's amazing. I mean, here, listen, you got to get your foot in the door, right? You got to develop those relationships. You've got to build your systems. You got to get all those onboard, all those carriers, right? Those are all brand new relationships. I mean, you didn't have all those relationships coming in the door. So I think, it makes a lot of sense on the front end when you're getting new customers to kind of bring the margins down. And then over time, as you increase your value to them, there are other opportunities, those margins can slowly go up, and you're probably not going to have an issue getting into that 15% range over time. I mean, is that kind of the plan?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like I said, I do come from that background of that 15%. It was always pushed on us from a management standpoint, like, hey,
Yep.
let's try to get 15%. 12 is absolute minimum. But I knew I couldn't necessarily go into that with a brand new MC starting my book of business from scratch. Like, I'm a big believer that you have to grow trust with customers, and you have to get your foot in the door. You have to show them your worth, show them your value, and that's done through action. So there was no way that for me, it didn't make any sense for me my rates would be higher than the market is at right now, right? Or what it was when I started.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about that is that as a startup, yes, you have some startup cost, right? I mean, you got some load boards and you got some software and you got your phone and you got those basic things, right? But as a general rule, your expenses are very low, which gives you the flexibility to keep your margins a little bit down, as opposed to a large brokerage who has a lot of fixed overhead.
Exactly.
Who, if they're not in that 15 to 20% range, right, they're really not putting anything to the bottom line, depending upon, their model or depending upon the type of overhead that they have. But larger companies have a lot more fixed overhead. Smaller companies have a lot more flexibility because they don't have that fixed overhead. So that's one of the advantages in a startup realm, is that you don't have to charge 15 or 20%, or, like larger brokers like to do, because you have that smaller overhead. So, I mean, that's an advantage. That's an advantage for you. I mean, you took advantage of it too, to make sure that you were able to hit your numbers.
I did, and my customers were very happy with my rates, and so I
Yeah.
was like, okay, well, we're getting somewhere. Another thing, I'm glad you brought up the expenses, is because I was honestly a little surprised of how low the total expenses at the end of the month were. Like, if I calculated my monthly costs, because I did that at the end of every single month, I did my monthly cost, my total cost so far, and I was like, okay, they're not bad. Of
Yeah.
course, I want the best tech. I want the data. I want the analytics. But when it comes to like the groundwork of actually getting your brokerage up and running, the costs are not that high.
No, not bad at all. Especially when you compare them to opening a franchise or opening, even if you're opening a pizza shop, a restaurant. I mean, you're going to need, 40, 50, 60,000 or more just to get the doors open. Whereas with a brokerage, it's pretty easy to get up and running and started for 5 to 10 grand, depending upon your credit. And then obviously you've got to be able to cash flow whatever your expenses are. But let's talk a little bit about your niche. I mean, I know that your family has a family-owned business, which is separate from the brokerage. So there's some things there, but talk to me a little bit about your niche. I mean, what did you focus in on, or did you go a little bit more broad? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I come from a generalist background. And when I say that, it's because most of my shippers were enterprise, like packaging, food and beverage. I did a lot of dry vans. I did some flatbeds, but I didn't, coming into this, like, that's one of the mistakes I think I made, was not necessarily honing in on a particular equipment type, particular region. I later learned that, and now I try to figure out, okay, what problems do I solve the most every single day? Like aside from what I've done for the last 8 years, what am I doing this year? And the problems I'm solving are like those last minute 911. Hey, I need a truck in the next hour. Like that's all I've done this year. And I maybe had like 2 RFPs and didn't win anything, but I had a shipper come back to me and say, hey, we had a carrier fall off this lane. Like, is this something that you can jump in on and help with? And that was because they had one load every 2 weeks. Like you can't expect a carrier to hold on to that rate without the volume, right? So that's where a broker came in handy and I was there. But now I would say expedited 911. I'm doing a lot of oversized. I'm doing a lot of flatbeds, which was a learning curve for me. I'm primarily in the Southeast, real hot Nashville. So as far as the FTL, LTL world, the TMS that I'm using, the software that I'm using, plugged into contract rates with all the LTL providers. And I didn't have that before. And I had a lot of requests to do LTL. And that's one of the reasons I went with Quote Factory. Both FTL, LTL, Southeast, flatbed, oversized, 911.
Gotcha. If you guys are listening carefully here, okay, Christina's background when she was working in a brokerage and logistics was a lot of van enterprise stuff, right? That's what she did a lot of. And she came in and started her brokerage. You know, she probably thought that that might be some of what she's going to do, but ultimately what ended up happening is the niche kind of evolved more into that, what she just described to you, right? Because that's probably wasn't what you did a lot of in your prior work. I mean, you probably did some of that.
I did some, but I mean, a lot of my customers depended on me for those contract. I had the ability to build strong carrier relationships with contract carriers for a specific lane that would run high volume throughout every single quarter or through peak season, right? And they depended on me for that. So I grew that. But coming into this, like large enterprise shippers are wary of new MCs. They're wary, like no matter how much experience I could scream and shout all day, hey, have almost a decade of experience. It's like, okay, what does your MC look like? You know, can you hold on to, can you pay your bills? Can you give us 60-day payment terms, right? And it just wasn't, while it may have been a fit for a brokerage that's 10 plus years, it wasn't a fit for me. So I had to go out and evolve my fit. I had to go out and evolve my niche. And part of that is like being flexible, being adaptable. That's so huge in this industry.
Yeah. And so you fell a little bit more into the spot market. You did a lot more project freight like you had talked about before. But the good part is now you've got that experience, right? Now you've got that, you know, you've kind of built that playbook. And so you can kind of scale that out. And that doesn't mean just because that's your niche doesn't mean you can't add other niches over time, right? People confuse what I say. I'm a big believer riches, you know, are in niches, right? I believe that new freight brokers should niche down and should then strategically expand from there. I've seen people do it both ways, right? I've seen particularly people like you who have a lot of background experience do it that way, where they've kind of continued that generalist, you know, type of approach. But new freight brokers and freight agents, rarely do I see them trying to play the generalist role where they have a lot of success, because it's like drinking from a fire hose. They're trying to learn everything about every market and every piece of equipment and every geography, and nothing sinks in. And all you do is get hit in the face with water all day and you come back with empty pockets, right? So I think niching down is an important part of that, but then you can strategically expand. So you had a lot of benefits with your past experience, kind of knowing some of those industries. And so I'm glad that you were able to navigate that. And it sounds like you're kind of really niched yourself into a spot where your customers are enjoying it and you're able to deliver, you know, at a high level.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, I came into this thinking, okay, well, I'll just continue what I've been doing, is I've just been kind of a mini expert in so many things. And I learned that I was like, well, I just need to answer some questions for myself so that I know who it is that I need to prospect. Because when I first started, I mean, I was calling everybody and anybody, you know, I was doing all the things, thought I was doing all the right things. I mean, I was just driving myself crazy with like cold calls and cold emails and how to prospect. And I was trying to learn sales and more of sales, even though from what I knew. And I was like, okay, you can't be a freight broker without freight. You have a non-solicit. You can't go after your customers. You have to start fresh. The starting fresh part was probably the hardest, but
well, let's talk a little bit about that. You brought that up, so I think that's interesting. Let's talk about the experience in the circumstances around the first shipper that you moved your first load for? Because I'm sure you remember that, right? Everybody remembers that fondly. Mine was over 20 years ago, and I still remember who it was and where the shipment was. So talk to us a little bit about that. How did that relationship start? How did it kind of transition through those early stages? And maybe even where is it today?
Yeah, so it was actually a referral. I was working hard prospecting and cold calling, and I did see some results from that, obviously. But it was a referral, and it was one of those things out of the blue, like, hey, we have, I think it was like this large milling machine of some sort coming out of Minnesota, going down to Georgia, and it was like last minute Friday, at 3 p.m., make it work. And I was like, yes, I can do this. I gave them a rate. They were really quick to say, do it, book it. I booked it and I said, yes, just made my first dollar.
How did the referral come about? Was it a friend? Was it a carrier? Was it another shipper? I mean, how did the referral come about, if you don't mind me asking?
It was a friend.
Yep.
So, yeah, I've got a lot of friends in the industry, luckily, been able to maintain really good relationships. So that's kind of how it came about. And it
Perfect.
was just a one-time shipment. It wasn't a long-term customer. My
Mhm.
long-term customers actually did come from cold calling and prospecting. And of course, I've gotten some referrals after that as well. But yeah, it's just a mix.
So from there on, after that referral, if you had to talk about the strategy that landed you the most customers, was it referrals? Was it cold email? Was it cold calling? Was it more face to face, doing outreach, walking on the docks? I mean, if you had to point to one that was kind of your primary that drove the most revenue, what would that be?
I would say it would be a mix of face to face plus personalized outreach. Especially in the market that we've had in the last, going on 3 years now, cold calling wasn't getting me very far. I've
Mhm.
seen some success, but I was, felt like I was under pressure to go ahead and start getting freight rolling in. So actually got in my car and I spent like an entire day just driving around Tennessee, Chattanooga, obviously. Went down to Dalton, Georgia, found, and I just started dropping off cups that said Booker on it and my phone number and my cards. So I've had some success with that. Obviously, people were like, don't need anybody, but thanks for coming by, right? And then just LinkedIn has been crucial in the prospecting efforts. Obviously, just reaching out, them being able to see, who I am, my background, if they were to go on my profile or whatnot. So those two things combined, especially keeping it personalized, has helped a ton.
So face to face, just kind of doing a drop in. You go to an industrial park, or you go to an area where there's a lot of manufacturing, and you're just dropping in to the front desk, or maybe you're squeezing around the back to the dock and trying to make your way in, and
Yeah.
just trying to develop some relationships that way. Get your foot in the door. And then LinkedIn was a big part of it. Now, you said cold calling wasn't as fruitful. Did you do, when you say customized, outreach, is that where you're talking more about like LinkedIn, where, hey, listen, you're sending a connection request to a shipper and then you're kind of developing a little bit of a rapport with them that way? Or what do you mean by more custom type relationship? I mean, or
Well,
outreach? Is that email? Is that more? Can you peel the onion back on that a little bit for us?
sure. So, I mean, I think a part of it is doing a lot of research, not a lot of research. It only takes like 2 to 3 minutes to know, like, hey, is this somebody that would be a decision maker, right?
Right.
Is this somebody that potentially has freight? Do they even use a freight broker or need one? So all those things you go into when you're looking for the person that you need to speak with. You have that in the back of your mind, and you can ask those questions head on if you don't already know them. I've had just being straightforward with people helps a ton, instead of just, hey, pitch, pitch, pitch. Like I'm essentially, hey, I need your freight. Obviously, yes. So does me and every other broker in the industry right now, right?
Right.
So just saying, this is what I do. This is my experience. I see you move machinery. I just moved a load down the street from you. Something like that, that will get a shipper's attention versus just a blanket.
Yeah. So you were gathering sales intelligence about the company, about the product, maybe about the person on LinkedIn, and then you were crafting a little bit of a customized outreach to them in order to try to build quick rapport.
Yeah, and I even went a little deeper into that, and I was driving myself crazy because I was doing so much research on people before started reaching out, because I just wanted to make it like apparent that I do care about their time. I do care about their freight, and I wanted to. I believe in great first impressions, right? I think that if a shipper runs across you and you give them that they have a good feeling about you, they're more likely to engage in a conversation. But I got overwhelmed with that, and I was like, I just need to keep it short and sweet. Just let them know that you're here for them if they don't have anything, and don't keep bombarding them with your pitch, right? But then again, I also believe strongly in like the art of follow-ups. You got to stay on people's minds if you want to be a part of their business, if you want to be a partner for them. So it's just a combination of everything, really.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Well, that's awesome. So talk to us. You mentioned earlier when we were talking, you talked about having cutting edge software. You talked about your TMS. What would be the one piece of software that you think had the most impact on the growth that you've seen over your first year? I mean, whether that be some sort of a CRM, or whether it was a TMS, or maybe it was some sort of, lead database like an Apollo or Zoom Info.
I would say my TMS, so that would be Quote Factory. And they are kind of a startup as well. So I went into that a little hesitant, but I also knew like, hey, if this wasn't going to work out, we could look at other options. There are options out there. But the
Mhm.
fact that they had that LTL software built in, and one of my first shippers was a distribution company that shipped 5, 6 LTL orders. And the customer or the prospect at the time was looking for a new broker, and I was like, wait a minute, I can make this work. So the puzzle pieces fit, and it pushed me forward with volume. It was a great way for me to stay organized. Really simple when I had that project come in, for me to duplicate shipments when I needed to, for me just to keep my carriers in one place. So I would say that was a
Perfect.
big
All
part.
right. So we're kind of dialing in. We've been peeling the onion back a little bit. You've been sharing a lot of great info. So my question now is, as we kind of move towards wrapping up here in the next few minutes, what was your biggest challenge?
Honestly, I think my mindset was probably the biggest challenge. I tried to recreate what I had with a 10-year plus brokerage that I was with, right? I tried to recreate the volume. I tried to recreate the profit margins and the relationships. And I think that being in a place where I had to evolve my thinking into the starting point and not necessarily the middle point, like I have to grow into that, right? That was hard for me because I come from high volume, right? And then I started at no volume. I started at no revenue. So just that scary point that when before you get those first few loads or that project or whatnot, thinking, am I going to be able to make this work? So that was difficult, I think. But once you have proof, once you give yourself proof that, hey, not only can I make this work, but I can actually grow, right? And so I think that was definitely part of it.
Yeah, especially you coming out of a high volume brokerage where you had enterprise clients where you were probably moving 10 or 20 or 30 or more loads a day, through the clients that you were managing. And then falling back to walking in on there's no loads on the load board and you're like, "Oh my God, what am I doing
Right.
today?"
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
kind of how it was. And I was like,
Yeah.
what did I do? Did I make a mistake?
It kind
Looking
of
back
comes
on it
back
now,
to you
I
have to
did.
adjust your expectations, and it's kind of falls back to that crawl, walk, run strategy,
Exactly.
right? You got to crawl before you walk, you got to walk before you run. And that's the same way in business. Now, some toddlers, and you're a mom and you already get this, some toddlers are walking at 10 months. Some toddlers don't walk until they're 14 months, right? I mean, and so everybody's a little bit different, but it sounds to me like you got off the ground pretty quickly. And I think some of that experience that you had, and then recognizing that, you're not a 10-year-old brokerage, you're not, so you got to readjust your expectations and then just build
Right.
block by block by block.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So listen, this is going to be your last question, but if there was one thing you would do different, one thing that you would change, one thing that you think would have the biggest impact on you getting further faster during this first year, what would that be? I know that's a tough question, but what do you think you would do differently?
It's pretty tough. Shoot, if I could go back to the start of my career, I would not have signed a non-solicit, that's for sure. It's just I think the most difficult part of it, I really don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry. It was all really hard.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I started my MC without knowing what I was really getting into. I think that I should have waited a little bit longer. You know, I didn't quite communicate as well to my previous employer that I was starting my MC. That was definitely difficult to deal with later on. So just it's not a, just so everybody knows, it is not one of those things that, hey, I'm going to dabble in and see if I can make this work. It's all in or nothing. You can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? You've got to be all in. And I think that at the very beginning, I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, trying to
Mhm.
decide what my next move was going to be. You know, I'm a mom. I want to work from home. I want to do this, I want to do that. You know, I want to bring my customers, but can't. It's just know what you're signing up for, do it the right way, do it the legal way. Know you're going to get kickback. Know everybody's not going to be happy for you, but that's okay. Set some goals for yourself. Be flexible, be adaptable, and grow brick by brick. It's all brick by brick.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, just so you guys know, I mean, Christina, again, she's a freight broker. She's a business owner. She's a wife. She's a mother of a young daughter that she has who's 2 or 3 years old. So she's got a lot on her plate. Not only that, but she started this brokerage in the middle of what everybody's screaming is a freight recession. And yes, I mean, I know markets go up and down, and I could debate with people till we're blue in the face about that. But she did it. She did over $1 million in sales her first year. And so could you. But the reality is you got to be committed, just like Christina said. You can't dip your toe in. You can't, this isn't a side hustle. This is a real business. So you got to take it serious, right? And if you do that, then who knows? Maybe you'll be on here in a future interview if that's something that you guys be able to see some success, just like Christina. And she's well on her way. I've known Christina maybe for about 6 months now. She was really early in her business when we had first met. I had no doubt in my mind that she was going to be here where she is today, even though she might have had a little bit of doubt.
Definitely had some
But I'm
doubts.
super excited for her, and I really want to thank you for jumping on today. Anything you want to share, your contact information, where people can find you, whether that be your website or somewhere on social, LinkedIn, whatever?
Sure. So you can go check out bookerfreight.com. That's just like our doing business name, but we are Booker Transport Solutions, but bookerfreight.com for
And
sure.
she's always active on LinkedIn too. So reach out to her on LinkedIn.
I jump in and out. I'm trying to stay more consistent this upcoming year, so you'll see me more.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Christina. Appreciate you
Thank
being
you.
here.
All right. Sounds
All
good.
right. And for those of you that are curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent and you need some help and you're looking for an online course or a mentor to help you get from A to Z, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. We're well known to be the most cost-effective and comprehensive online freight broker and freight agent training program. And again, you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Again, we have a 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. Nobody in the industry does that. Appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you next week on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live.